And local groups, for example, out in Dodge County that had a ditch down through between some drumlins, could come in, petition to be a drainage district, and the local drainage board would then go through the process that's described in the law and report to the court on whether this was or was not a good idea. And several were denied over time. My job was to write a feasibility study regarding whether the soils could be adequately drained and improved so that they could afford to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's since, in recent legislation, no longer required. This district in particular, all districts under 89 had the option of retaining their own drainage board. They were not under the county board. And this group had its own drainage board up to what, Wayne, 2000? Well, they may still have a board and as different from Scott and I on this board, where the money for each district is kept in the county treasurer's office, those boards manage their money in their own way. So Scott and I are starting from nothing. We have no old plans and so on, so we have to go through this process of getting all this information together in order to establish the base on which from then to operate. And I should advise that there is an option where you dissolve the district before we spend a lot of money. It's spelled out in the law. You have to have your own attorney to do that, but there is that possibility that, and we, the board, are not involved other than the court will ask us up or down, and we're probably not going to argue with the people that are involved. And an order is issued by circuit court.
Thank you. May I forgive me to interrupt just for a moment, sir. The history is fascinating, and I would love to know more about it. I'm really would like to know what has perpetuated, what has brought this all up and made it current.
Look around you.
Okay.
There was a storm a year ago, August.
Right. Flooded our property.
That watered this area with, what was it, 10 inches?
14 or more.
Well, I live a mile south of here, and I got 10 up on the hill. But the upshot was that the two ridges to the west and the north are draining out. The pump that's been mentioned,
Right.
I guess, was not operating. It's a private pump, so I honestly don't know. And that is expected to continue. And so we need to, well, what we're addressing is what shall be done, if anything. How is that to be done? And over time, handle the situation. And it's not going to get perfect. When you're at the bottom of the hill, it sort of puts you in a position where sooner or later the water comes. And so, as a result of our last meeting, we put together, well, I had nothing to do with it really, but we put together this projected assessment for cost and the benefits, which are not anything in close to a lock, because anyone who has information that can improve the description of what's going on with their property should get it to us in writing so that we can then fit all the pieces together. For example, mapped wetlands, where you can't do anything there now in the way of improving the drainage on the land. And there may be lands that were in the district where the drainage on farm or whatever was never installed for reasons known to the owner. I'm not gonna try to
I understand.
judge anything that went on. And we end up then with a circumstance where hopefully we have plans and information. Everybody knows what's going on, what's gonna happen, when it should happen, or whether it should happen. And we, the board, have never spent anybody's money when they didn't want us to. Now, we have routine administrative costs, attorney, and so on. Scott doesn't put in an expense account, nor does Paul Molly, the one that's not here tonight. I do, and I get a whole $15 an hour if I remember to write it down. So, you know,
Leonard, if I may, can I expand?
yeah,
on your
you,
ideas?
please.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Bart Chapman. I'm the state drainage engineer with DATCAP. And so, the Middleton Drainage District was started in 1916. And this was a time in 1916, all over the state, hundreds of drainage districts, draining wetlands for agriculture, right? So that's the history of drainage districts. Drainage district boards, now county boards that oversee all districts within a county, have tax authority. They're a quasi-municipal entity appointed by the board or by the courts. So the last assessment on property owners in the Middleton district was in 1958. It was the last time landowners within the Middleton district was assessed for any costs. Since then, we've got the railroad, we've got Highway 14, we've got a lot of development, we've got ATC running a power line in, and over time, as our urban areas have expanded, they've encroached on drainage district boundaries. And so now drainage districts and drainage boards are having a lot more complexity in draining the district, which is primarily for agricultural resources, right? We drain ag lands to grow crops. But now as our urban boundaries have expanded and encroached on our ag lands, we're now seeing the impacts of water drainage from your neighborhood, from the development up on the crest here. And so all over the state, we are seeing urban areas and towns now trying to turn to drainage boards to help them with their drainage issues. And what's happened now, we've had 5 of the biggest storms on record in the last 10 years. We are in a wet cycle. There is water everywhere in the upper Midwest. And so unlike, or like many of our citizens, we're concerned and we want to get this water drained out of our neighborhoods. It just so happens that this district is a legal quasi-municipal entity with taxation authority. So they can assess properties within the district to help with the infrastructure. And so now that's what we're facing here. We have a district that is active, meaning it's an official, on the books, active drainage district. All the landowners within the boundaries of that district will and can be assessed to help improve the drainage. And so that's where we're at right now. And it was that flood of 2018 in August that is the impetus of why we're here today. And so when we were here in October, we just scratched the surface. And if we're on the REA estimate, this $19,000 estimate is just to assess what's on the ground right now. And from there, that will give us a better report and picture on what is the drainage, what is the where can we get drainage? Where are the choke points? I will tell you, this is a very complex one, with all those entities involved, the railroad, state highway, ATC, Black Earth Creek, a Class 1 trout stream. All of those create a really complex, comprehensive issue that we have to work through right now. But ultimately, you landowners are the owners of this infrastructure, and this board takes your input to figure out what the best solution is. And so that's what we're here tonight, to see what the best solution is moving forward.
Question, Bart.
Yeah.
So the 25K for time and materials mentioned, is that on top of the 19? So that would, so basically 45K?
No,
No,
I think,
Okay.
no,
Got it.
no, that 19
higher
is just an
end.
estimate from their engineer saying, this is the initial
Got it,
estimate.
got it,
we
got it,
have.
got it. Okay, so.
That does not include projects and projects that they may implement moving forward.
Got it, okay.
So
yeah.
we're estimating that the actual cost would be closer to 25,000, and that's.
Just for the
Yeah.
assessment.
Got it.
And projects from there are unknown at this point. The
Absolutely.
assessment will give us information.
Great.
Yes,
Can I ask you a question about the equitability of the assessments? The homeowners are assessed in the district at $75. A few of us farmers are going to bear the lion's share of the cost here. What does state law say about that? And can the city of Middleton be assessed for Dane County for their properties that are being farmed in the district? Can you explain that to me?
yeah, you know, the statute is not real specific on assessments. The benefits are based on soil type. And remember, this statute was developed strictly from ag lands.
I understand.
Soil type, topography, and the outlet of the water. Where does the water go? So if a farm is in the lowland and they need to run multiple tiles to get that water drained, they're benefiting more than another soil type that only needs one drain.
I
Right?
understand
And
that.
so that assessment is not spelled out in statute. They left that up to engineers to figure out. In general, average is $5 an acre for ag land, or a minimum of $50 per lot. So you can own up to 10 acres before that $5 an acre increases that. In this particular example assessment that we put out, or the board put out, it's a little higher than that because we're starting from scratch on this one. There is no specifications on this drainage district. This district is 104 years old, so that assessment's gonna have to be reevaluated. And that's why I believe the example assessment that Scott and Leonard and the board put out was a little higher than the state average. Does that make sense?
I'm very well aware of how ag lands are assessed, but I still bring up the discrepancy of residential properties and being there impervious surfaces and putting water into the district. I will point out this to you, that much of this land of the original Lake Middleton lake bed is officially mapped by the DNR as wetland. In many of the areas, including my farms in the western part of the district, the previous owners and in our time, in 60 years, it was unfeasible to put any drains, so there are no drains. So keep that in mind as you go forward. I
Yeah.
will submit copies of those wetland maps to you, and I believe that will impact the assessments on ag land. in many ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, as our urban land encroaches on our ag lands, those assessments, I mean, this statute 89, 88, they were developed in the late 1800s.
I understand that.
So there is no specific language in the law that identifies impervious surfaces or developments.
If there are ever votes taken within this district, how are the votes divvied up? Is it based on area drained? That's the way it was under chapter 89. Can you explain that?
Sure. So all landowners have the opportunity to give input in an official public hearing. Tonight, we're in a public meeting. This is information only. We're having a discussion. An official public hearing will be held prior to any assessment, and the board will present the information and the details on how they are assessing each landowner, at which time each landowner will have an opportunity to give public statement in that public hearing. The board will take all that information and make a determination and an order, either approving or disapproving that petition. If they approve it and you don't agree, landowners have the ability to appeal their decision, and that goes to the circuit court, and the judge will do what's called a judicial review and will take testimony from landowners to try to determine whether the board's decision was based on good information and thorough information.
But is
And
there-
that's the process.
Is there ever a situation where there is a vote of district members based on percentage of lands drained, on actual vote taken? Is there ever any situation in a district?
Can I interrupt?
Please.
Yes. And it's not on acreage, it's on benefits.
Yeah.
And we held such a one in a district north of Sun Prairie a while back. And since you brought the subject up, we, the board, can create a scalar which says a house lot may be at 75 and a commercial lot is 10 times that in terms of their share of costs. So we've not locked in on anything. There's a district in Portage County that's simply on a per acre basis, and it is an annual assessment. We have operated on the basis of when we need money, then we collect some. We don't appreciate having it up at the treasurer's office because we don't get the interest. Because of their bookkeeping services and so on, get to collect interest on any money that happens to be in the account. And we, the board, cannot spend any money without issuing an order signed by all three of us and reviewed by the treasurer before they cut a check. And when they cut the check, if history serves me correctly, keep it for about a week before they actually mail it to whoever it needs to go to. So there's no lock until after we've held the hearing on how the assessments will be made for the various kinds of land use. And just so as long as I'm venting my concern, it could be that an individual lot's amount of $75 becomes $225 or $150 or something larger in order to be able to generate the necessary money to do what's needed. And of course, in a hearing, we get the response from them that are involved.
Does that
You
money,
recognize him?
Well, him first.
me? Or
Yes.
Is the money that is assessed collected annually, or is it only collected to the point where the money that's needed and then it's done? Or is it continuously being collected so that it's sitting there in case more improvements be needed?
This board operates that we only assess for cost when money's needed. So it's not an annual assessment. Now,
And we'd like to have 5,000 or so in every account for unexpected circumstances.
well, probably a little higher than that, cause 5,000 don't go far anymore.
Well,
but-
yeah, it used to be 5, I suppose now it's gonna be 10, but.
Yeah. So yes, that's your answer. It's as needed is how we make the assessments. That's how we've operated. Back there.
Yes, I noticed in your sample assessment, there's no municipalities.
Could you
being-
stand up so I can hear you?
Sure. I noticed in your sample assessment, there are no municipalities included with an assessment. Is that gonna be your approach, that municipalities are excluded from assessment?
They aren't. simply because they're a different unit of government. We have, and where municipal lands, for example, in this district, we've got some county lands, if they have its own conservancy or whatever in their structure, no benefits for drainage purposes.
Which effectively exempts them from assessment.
So if Dane County bought that, where that pond is right now, on the Hillenbrand farm, the big problem there is that that's not being pumped, but they're not gonna have to pay anything or help with any of this because they're the Dane County. And it's considered wetlands.
There you go.
I was just clarifying, that's all.
So I got a question for you. You said the benefits were based on soil type. What about people that add to the problem? Or like, if there's subdivisions or houses or something like that that's not in the district, but it drains to the district? Do they get assessed too, or
We
are they
we cannot operate making assessments outside of the boundary of the district.
even though if something flows into it?
We understand,
Yeah.
Okay.
because the district was not the watershed.
Okay.
It was, and you find districts scattered around where there's a chunk cut out of it over here, and you, for the life of you, can't figure out why, but way back when it was created, it seemed like it was a whole lot less trouble just to let that person not be in, so long as they were out toward the edge or something.
Right.
And now we've got, as he's pointed out, in subdivisions coming in, rural and otherwise, and you're on the west side of the road and you get an assessment for cost, and the guy on the other side that's sending the water through the culvert across your land is not. And we have,
get
we
that
can't do
argument-
that.
And we get that argument from people elsewhere too, that, you know, they don't understand why they've gotta pay their $75 and the guy across the street doesn't.
That's why when we develop the plans, we do this assessment for the 10-year, 24-hour storm for the watershed that's going into that channel. To tell us how big it ought to be to pass, if you will, a flood.
And if I can follow up on that, there's a process for any landowner within the district to petition the board to annex lands within that watershed. Right now, we have 3 ongoing in the state that landowners within active districts have petitioned the board to annex lands. That includes the entire upper watersheds. We just had a court decision in December that approved one that was very contentious down in Racine County. We have 2 up in Outagamie County right now going on, and 1 in Adams County. So there is a mechanism in order to reconcile or rectify that situation. It's a process, but that process was put in place early on in the statute.
There is a provision in the law and the administrative rule that if you discover that someone has made a direct connection with their drainage system to district facilities and are not paying their fair share, that upon notice of that condition, the board then can take an action because of the direct connection.
Is that only limited to people that are already in the district?
That would be if someone was outside of the district, but
Okay.
they either dug a ditch to the district facility or ran a tile line to the district ditch, then you could get that property annexed into the district.
For instance, I hate to get into too much detail, but the neighborhood up on the hill off Airport Road, south of Airport Road, comes down to the top of the hill. There's a green space. Eric Henrich's property. Eric Henrichs has 40 acres there. During that flood in 18, there's a retention pond up on that hill. So they drained all of their streets and ditches and driveways to that retention pond, which then has an outlet, has an outlet that goes down the hill onto Eric's property. And I've got pictures of the landslide that nobody else can see on Eric's property. So they are contributing. They made a direct connection, perhaps.
We, the board, have not had a good experience with any detention ponds that adjoin any of the districts that we're involved with. But because the water is dropped outside of the district boundary and away from our district's facilities, we can't do it, the drainage board can't do anything about it.
Okay.
It's just part of the watershed. And this,
So
we're
you
having all kinds of problems with those issues.
Yeah, because the same thing behind the white church on Wayside Road.
Mhm.
I have pictures of an actual water rushing down across, comes through our property, it washed out our driveway, goes down across, the neighbor's, farmland, and it has happened, and we're flooded out.
We understand.
So I'm just wondering if we can also find out how we can get help with those situations, because it's not right. I mean, it costs us, and then the same way with, I know Sun Prairie is looking at, they have 2 water or drainage districts that they are also contributing, because I know the city of Middleton has their drainage going down behind Hidden Oaks, right along there, and all of, like, Welton's property. If you, no, you can't miss it. If you sit and drive down there, you can see that whole hill is, everything is draining down. By Hy-Vee, that, you can see where it drenches, and it all goes into that Blacker, or into the Mud Lake, whatever you wanna call it.
Have we any circumstances in the state where the board and the district are suing mismanagement outside of the district for damages to their facility? I'm not aware of any myself, but
No, I don't think so, Leonard. No, not that I'm aware of. But what we do have are several active districts petitioning the board to annex lands that are not currently within the boundaries of the districts, that are receiving benefits from the drainage system that the district pays for. And that is what we're seeing.
And I'd like to know how, Dane County has stormwater plants. How is this happening? I mean, I know, the storage guy, he paid big bucks up on the hill on the other side where the railroad tracks are, to have a drainage pond that he had to have the county, but it doesn't seem like the other, when new businesses are going in, or even existing ones, as they add on buildings or make changes, what is their stormwater? Because my thought is, they should be being assessed. If you're gonna use a stormwater and you're gonna direct into an area instead of penalizing landowners who have no control over that water, is that something that you're looking at too, as far as when developers are doing their thing? Yep, we're gonna assess you, you're gonna have to pay into this, instead of putting all that money. We've got farmers, $11,000, $14,000, and I just don't understand why a lot of this water is not flowing just because there was a storm. There's constantly water running. Whenever it rains, that pond is always getting filled up.
Yeah, and let me reiterate, these laws were written in a time when these districts were draining ag lands. And we're seeing the encroachment on development into these districts. And now we're trying to, not we, but there's a trend right now that landowners are looking toward drainage districts and trying to utilize them as flood mitigation districts. And the statute and the drainage law in the state of Wisconsin was never developed to be flood mitigation districts. They were strictly for the benefit for agriculture. And so we're in a time right now in 2020, in this wet cycle, that we're seeing all this water, and now we're turning to drainage boards in a statute that was written for agriculture to come up with solutions for our flooding issues. And so, there's gonna be a lot of, in the next, if this wet cycle continues, our legislature will act on it, and they'll try to figure out or modify the statutes that will allow that type of, address that. You know, county zoning, county planning, they're the ones that are looking at where the water's going, where the outlet of the water's going, right? How big a detention ponds they need to build for developments. And so all that engineering is being done, and all that planning is being done. But when we overlay that on top of drainage district, drainage law, we're putting a square peg in a round hole, okay?
Jeremy, any comments?
Jeremy Blusick, I'm with Dane County Water Resource Engineering. We do stormwater. Every time there's a development that gets altered, there are controls that are put in. Whether they're maintained or not, I don't know about the specific instances you're talking about. It's likely they probably aren't, and we can take a look at those. But just to say, the storm in 2018 was about 10 inches larger than any of our stuff is designed for.
Well, I have pictures of 2016, when that pond was high. And it wasn't the rain that was there, but if that pump wasn't running, there was always water there. And I know because we lost a lot of crop out of that. And so my concern is that I read up on something called a stormwater pond. Is this a stormwater pond?
Yeah, that's what they're built for, right? So as we pave over land and we put roofs up, right, that rainwater is no longer infiltrating into our soil and being slowed down as it runs down wherever it heads to Black Earth Creek and out to the Mississippi River, the Wisconsin River.
So what is it doing to the fish? Because I'll tell you right now, that's.
There's a lot of issues, but I think we should stay on point here. So the assessment, we just got done with the assessment. I think it's realistic to get REIA to do this. And now going into the assessment that you guys put out, an example of first cut brush to raise money to assess the district's infrastructure, so we can have real data on where the pinch points are and what projects need to be done to get this drainage district operating more efficiently.
Can we go on to number 5? I'd like to hear about the Dane County intent to purchase the land. Have they purchased it? And what's happening with the berm,
Has
the pond?
has that actually
The
been bought,
assessment,
Jeremy?
did you wanna,
I wanna first go back, I'm gonna go right back to that $75. Okay, so on this example assessment, we gotta remember that the drainage districts were designed for agricultural lands. So everything's based on a benefit to a particular soil type. Now, the higher, drier soils obviously don't have as much of a benefit number. So in the lower grounds, obviously that benefit, if you look in the thing, you'll see the percentage of the benefits each parcel. Back to the house lot. The house lots generally typically are built on higher ground. Therefore, the soil type doesn't have very high benefit to it. So a house lot typically doesn't hit a very high assessment, and we still gotta run all the paperwork and stuff. And this board set the fee on those at $75. It started out at $35, we raised it to $50, and this last time we raised it to $75. And it may be not enough, but that's where we set the lots at 75, because under the benefit assessment, they don't even hit that. So that's our minimum is $75. And you'll notice that there's some lots, depending on, there's a couple in there that are like an acre and a half. They'll have $150, $200 assessment on them because their zoning code isn't agricultural. They get, so not all the lots are $75. Some of them are a little bit higher, but a general residential lot don't hit the minimum or the So hits the $75 minimum, that's where that number comes from. We could raise that, like Leonard said.
What about the commercial lots being
The,
only 75?
the commercial lots, they're a different code there, and I noticed that that one is an awful small lot, it's only an 1.5 acre commercial lot. So its benefit, it must be on a fairly dry soil, because it doesn't have a very high benefit number, so that's why it hit the $75 minimum. So $75, they're just minimums, and the reason they're at that is because when you run it through the program, it doesn't get a high benefit, it doesn't get a high assessment number, so I think it's a minimum.
We had Scott's father, Leonard, was on the board before Scott, and we were involved in updating the plans for 9 districts back in 2003 to 2005, somewhere in that vicinity. And we have a scaler that we can bring back into play, which looks at the size of for example, a commercial operation 10 times whatever it is for a house, and so on. We can put that scaler in place for this district. The $75 breaks even. That is the cost of creating the assessment for cost and the mailings, and if you were to receive an assessment for cost, it'd be a so-called green sheet, which you then, and you have, when the process is operating, when you get that assessment, you have 4 months to pay. And let's say we made that assessment next week. So you got 4 months, and then the interest starts. And come October, I, as the secretary, certify to the treasurer, and they are the ones who are keeping the records, that some weren't paid. And so it goes on the property tax bill on the line that says drainage tax. Well, that means we might get the money the following March. But in fact, you could still not pay. So we had an assessment for cost go out, and the fact is that I can't certify that people in other districts haven't paid until this coming October. And so we're a year back in collecting monies. So saying that we need 25,000 doesn't mean that when we make the assessment, we're gonna get 25,000. We may not. That's why we have to make it a little bigger. But the fact is that we're gonna have to review this $75 because by the time we get through the process and got the money, we're even. So we'll probably have to raise it, but don't know. What else do we need to do?
Number 5, please, the agenda.
I still have a question on assessment, sir. I asked, if, being a farmer here, if I want to challenge the assessment, the hypothetical assessment, I realize, and give information to the board, I need to submit this in writing?
Yes.
And what data can I share? DNR wetlands mapping, NRCS mapping?
For your particular piece of ground, whether that's a 40 or something else.
In this case, it's 4 40s, a remnant, 2 complete 40s and 2 remnant 40s.
Then you demonstrate to us that you can't drain it, and the reasons for doing so.
Okay, I would submit the wetlands mapping, both from NRCS and DNR.
NRCS is not, well.
DNR would be sufficient then?
NRCS, for you city folks, in 1988, if I remember right, became the keeper of mapping wetlands on agricultural lands. And there are only two that apply to agriculture straight on. One is prior converted, that somewhere out there, there's a ditch and some tile and whatever. And farmed wetland, which has some kind of drainage off and on, but when it's categorized in that situation, it cannot be improved. The prior converted, they can go ahead and install more tile, update facilities and so on.
I have, for instance, on my properties, no prior converted wetlands, but I would submit that. What other information would the board need, if I can ask you this, and I imagine some of my neighbors are interested in this too. FSA crop history reports going back as far as I.
We use corn.
Corn, okay.
As the crop that essentially, if you will, everybody could grow or does grow.
Yes.
And county yields.
Yes.
Now, when we set this up, we set all of the soils and their yields and so on against one another. Those yields have gone up, but they're still balance-wise against one another the same. So as we're coating it, you'll have the sable silt loam, which is a wonderful wet mineral soil that when properly drained has the highest yield of any soil in the county, beats the prairie soils and so on. But we have to know that, now, just because it wasn't drained or isn't drained, doesn't mean that the drainage benefits are not there.
But if you can't drain through a mapped wetland, and there never was any previous tile for drain, this is going to be my argument with my farm here. And the highest beneficial assessed soils are like the Houghton Muck series and the Orion silt loam and Marchand silt loams and other such. The highest assessed soils were in the former Middleton Lake bed. That's what I'm seeing on my USDA soil maps. So I would need to submit this in writing with mapping, and does it need to be done through an attorney, or can I do that myself?
Oh, no, God, let's not.
Well, I'm just asking, so I follow the proper protocol here.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of the record that's involved, because my sense is we must hold a hearing before we lock this thing in place.
You're gonna hold a hearing. If you're unhappy after the hearing with your assessment, you can petition. And just because one person is petitioning, that does not invalidate the entire assessment. That's just on their specific property.
And if you petition, I assume we're going to court.
Well, you're
Well, that's,
petitioning
no,
for
not
such a type of
necessarily.
hearing. Then if they're unhappy with
The
the final
assessment.
response, then they can
Then we
appeal
can-
to the.
Then we
Supreme Court.
hold another hearing, I guess.
Then we have an observation and another hearing, potential termination.
So I would address this to Mr. Mitby, whatever materials at his law firm's office, how would I submit?
Well-
You address it to the board, I would think, but you can submit it to John.
Okay,
And then we'll have to get together and look at it.
thank you very much.
But know that we make no promises one way or the other.
I realize, but, I think I can make a pretty good case. Since in over 100 years, some of my farm was assessed in the previous, farms were assessed in the previous drainage district and got no benefits from it. And I think I can make a pretty good case here, and especially now.
Well, we'll wait to see what that is. Thank you. Sir?
It's not sir.
Oh, ma'am.
But, in any event, it's also irrelevant. And I am an attorney. I need to go back to Cindy's question, because I don't think we got an answer. With respect to the trial assessments that you put out, the one that may or may not ever occur, there is no assessment against any governmentally owned property. Not the city, not the town, not the county, not anyone. And that's fine, because the administrative rules say that you may assess those entities, not that you are required to assess those entities. Is the plan to not assess those entities?
We have not done so to this date.
Thank you.
But
We appreciate it.
we can do a petition to do so?
We in
The landowners?
fact could assess towns for drainage facilities that keep roads operable, where they're down through low areas. We have not done that either. I don't know that other counties have, but, my sense is that when we start sending bills to municipalities, things get tricky. So we've not gone there.
Well, we have.
Oh, okay.
What if
But I'm not
what
sure
if
they
the
pay.
county has land that is growing crop?
Huh?
What if some of the county land is growing crop?
Then that changes the game. Then it's not conservancy or some other category. If they're renting land, owned land, and they're renting it to farmers or whatever, that's a different game.
They're doing that right now on the Sunnyside unit as well as the Hendricks property.
Well, that's the kind, Scott and I are starting from nowhere. Neither one of us live out here and have a history with the area, so evidence of that nature is valuable to us. Because if a benefit is being received, then they ought to pay their share. That's everybody.
Leonard, I would just say that we're expecting to pay on our cropland. If the cropland that's being cropped and drained, we're expecting to be assessed.
Okay,
I mean, it's no different than any other cropland.
thanks.
Well, and we have gotten assessments from you guys before, so.
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have assessed the Sun Prairie School District and the city of Sun Prairie before, so.
And 8844, 88's the chapter of our statute that governs drainage law. 88 subsection 44 is the section that allows the contesting of the validity of assessments. So landowners absolutely have the right to question.
So, okay,
One minor, is it possible to withdraw from the district?
you can petition to be removed.
I mean, if you don't have any agriculture on your land whatsoever, if you're just
If you're on
residential.
the edge, you got a chance. Otherwise,
If you're in the middle, if you're in the middle.
We're
it's
not gonna
like
have
that.
holes in districts.
Yes. So that's generally how we view that. If you're on the edge of a district, there's a likelihood that we wouldn't approve that, but if you're in the middle, it's slim.
Say everybody petition to withdraw from it, then what would happen?
So the district, you can
Because I'm just saying, who would take it over?
Nobody.
Nobody.
It's gone.
And each individual landowner to do their own thing.
And getting a permit to do anything with a ditch and so on.